for example, a salaried employee has a specific age at which he has to stop working. As markets mature, returns also tend to go down. Mutual fund as a product is a genuinely good product. It works really well. It solves a lot of problems for a lot of people. Start planning and start investing right away.
Welcome to Money Skills by Scripbox. Today we have Rinju Abraham, Chief Business Officer, Scripbox, a market specialist who has helped thousands get retirement ready, actually make not working an option. Rinju, I'm looking forward to an enlightening conversation on planning and investing successfully for your retirement.
Thanks, Varun. Thank you for having me today.
So, Rinju, you can get a loan for almost all your important financial goals. Buying a home, planning for your child's education, a car loan. But retirement is that one important goal you don't get a loan for. Something you can conveniently keep postponing. So how does one really get started on something so important but not urgent? How do you get started on retirement planning?
The way you put it is actually really beautiful. Retirement is one non-negotiable event that happens to most people. It is different for different professions. So for example, a salaried employee has a specific age at which he has to stop working. That is a mandate by the employer. But if you're a doctor or a lawyer or a practicing professional, you tend to have a lot more flexibility in terms of deciding at what age you want to stop earning. So realizing that it's a non-negotiable event and starting to plan for it is the significantly important part of the entire process. The second thing is to understand what lifestyle you're leading right now and figure out in your mind what is the sort of lifestyle that you want to lead post-retirement. Life is that you don't want to have too much of a downgrade just because your income has stopped as well. The third thing is to actually set achievable targets and start towards it. Start so that you can course correct and get back on track. So that is one big thing that I would recommend people start planning and start investing right away.
So now let's assume somebody is aware and get started. What are some of the important pitfalls they should take care of while planning for their retirement?
So I've seen a lot of practicing financial advisors do retirement plans for people. And a couple of areas that I thought, planning for a longevity of 85. A lot of professionals think of retirement planning with an 85 at the outer. We actually say that you should plan with 100. Longevity is increasing with time and people are living for a longer period. The worst time to run out of money is when you're old and you don't have any earning capacity. So I would recommend everyone plan with 100 as a life expectancy in your retirement. The second thing is to look at your current lifestyle and then expect the same expenses to sort of carry on into the future. Most people tend to start thinking about retirement around 35, 40 and they tend to superimpose what their current living expenses are into the future. But the expenses that you will face as a retired person are very, very different from what you face now. For example, when you are retired, the medical expenses tend to be significantly higher than what you currently experience. And medical expenses, in my understanding, have a much higher inflation rate. So I see cost of services, especially on the medical side and so on and so forth, go up by more than 13-14% every year. So you have to factor in a much higher expense on expenses that you're not, a much higher value and expenses that you're not really spending on now. The next thing that I see a lot of professionals do is they use a slightly higher than preferred rate of return when they calculate what is the expected investment required. So we recommend that you look at data, look at past history, understand what each market-linked product can give you in terms of returns, but budget with a margin of safety also. So if the Indian market has given you like a 12.5% return over the past 20 years, when you're planning for a retirement goal, we would recommend that you actually work with 12 plus or minus 3 or plus or minus 3.5%, because as markets mature, returns also tend to go down. So bring in that margin of safety into your retirement planning. That is something that we would recommend people do.
Rinju, I really liked that point on keeping a range and margin of safety, because I guess it helps you calibrate much better.
It does. So, like I said, the principle of investing is around margin of safety. Better to be in a position where your wealth outlives you rather than you outlive your wealth.
So it's like you want to ensure there's enough gold by the time you have too much silver on your hair.
That's very well put.
So I was having a conversation with my dad recently, and when I told him how much I pay rent for my apartment in Bangalore, he almost fell out of his chair. And then we actually got down and I told, okay, Dad, let's see what you were paying 25 years back. And when we inflated it, it was actually quite close. So we keep hearing that inflation is that one really powerful and silent enemy you need to plan for in your retirement. So I have some questions around inflation. You have like more than 2 decades of experience. What do you think is a good inflation range to consider when you plan for your retirement 15, 20, 25 years down? And how does one prepare for it?
So usually when you talk about inflation, people look at 6-7% as the number, but that should be different when it comes to retirement planning. So when it comes to retirement planning, in my experience at least, it's better to plan with a slightly higher inflation number in mind, because the inflation number that we read in newspapers, 6%, 7%, that typically is inflation of goods. But as you progress in life, you tend to have a lot more of your consumption be towards the services end of it. Services tends to be slightly higher inflation compared to what goods inflation is. So for example, medical inflation, I've seen it around 13.5%, but there could be other expenses which are slightly lower at 8%. So blended, when you're looking at inflation numbers for your retirement planning.
So what do you think are the appropriate products one should include while planning for your retirement portfolio?
See, well, the products that you choose while you actually implement a retirement strategy is a function of, primarily a function of 2 things. One is how far away is the actual goal of retirement, and what is the amount that you have vis-a-vis what is the goal that you need. But we would recommend, so usually people start planning for retirement around the 35-40 range. So there you'll have a mix of risk assets and non-risk assets, but you'll have a bias towards the risk assets. When it comes to risk assets, we're looking at stuff I would recommend that we look at all the alternatives available and then evaluate the alternatives based on certain criteria. Right? So my preference is that we stick with regulated products where there is a clear regulator, where there are rules, there is protection to the investor, right? So mutual funds, stocks, these are all regulated products. There's a lot of advantage with sticking with regulated products. One more way to think about it is products that are easy to understand. Typically, the really complicated products, right? They're not beneficial to the customer so much as the manufacturer itself. So keep it simple, stick to products that you can understand. I like stuff where there is a daily liquidity. For example, I don't want my retirement corpus to be stuck in a product where I cannot withdraw it at a point where I need it. Right? The advantage with a mutual fund or stocks is that you're able to exit on the day that you want to exit. So daily liquidity is one criteria when I'm looking at a investment alternative. I also like products that have a market pricing mechanism where I am not dependent on someone else determining or one entity determining what is the value of the product, because a market pricing mechanism gives you that flexibility to understand what's the real value and then plan your goals according to that. Ease of transaction tends to be one factor that you should be considering, because you want it to be in bite-sized chunks. So let's say that is one downside about real estate, for example, that if I want to invest in a real estate property, I need a significant amount of money. But what if my available corpus is not that large, right? So you want to look at something that has a ease of transaction in terms of ticket size, in terms of convenience of actually transacting, finding a buyer, finding a seller, so on and so forth. Tax friendliness is one consideration that you should have. And the history of the product and how predictable are these returns, right? These are factors that you would consider when choosing a product that you would incorporate into your.
So when I look at these factors, it primarily would mean something like mutual funds. Is it mutual fund sahi hai?
See, the mutual fund as a product is a genuinely good product. it works really well. It solves a lot of problems for a lot of people. For example, the biggest advantage with a mutual fund is you're investing in an asset class. Like, let's talk about equity funds. You're investing in an asset class like equities. It is being managed by professionals, and you're getting the expertise of a really large team of professionals at a minuscule cost. It allows you to transact very easily. It's a simple to understand product. The tax friendliness is there. So mutual funds is a great product to have. It's not the only product that you could think of other products. But from a mass adoption or a mass market product, mutual funds is a great thing to include.
So, Rinju, beyond mutual funds, we hear about these interesting alternative products like peer-to-peer lending, which proclaim to give you almost guaranteed returns between 14 to 18%. Do they have a role in a retirement portfolio? Are there some risks we need to be aware of?
I'm a biased person when I have certain criteria for selecting an investment. So products such as peer-to-peer lending, I am biased against them. Right? I believe that these financial innovations are not new. A bank is anyway better positioned to make a loan to a individual than one individual himself. Right? An institution has a lot of learning. There's institutional memory that has brought them to where they are. So let's respect specialization for what it is. Right? It brings a lot of advantages. So I am personally biased against products that are not regulated or products that are not established. And financial innovation, like I said, tends to be something I tend to avoid.
So, Rinju, I've heard that the best time to start planning for your retirement is before your boss or company does.
That's a good one, actually.
So, how early really should one start investing for retirement?
See, the truth is, the earlier the better. You've got to think about it like this. For a regular salaried employee, right? Let's assume that you start working at 25. Typically by 60, you're expected to stop working. And if you live up to, let's say longevity is going up, so you live up to 100. So your retired life is actually longer in terms of longevity compared to your working life. So the earlier you start, the better. That being said, it is difficult to get the really young kids to start thinking about retirement at 25, 26. So in my experience, around 30, 35 would be the best time to start planning for it. But reality is we see people starting quite late, and starting late brings its own troubles, because then you have to start saving a larger part of your salary into your retirement corpus and so on. But the earlier, the better is what we recommend.
So the other thing I've heard often from salaried employees is with regard to their EPF. It's a nice automated, systematic way to invest. So is there something one can similarly apply while planning for their retirement?
It's a very important point that you raised. So I tell people who work with me that there is something about work that it fills the time that you have. Okay. The same thing about expenses. If you have surplus money, something will come and fill it up, and that's where an NPS or an SIP sort of thing works really, really well. Because on a set date, the day your salary comes, the very next day something goes away, and then you learn to live with what you have. That being said, I am not a proponent of saying that you have to save 50%, 60% of your salary. You should live your life. You should not be depriving yourself of too much, but you should live your life cognizant of the fact that you have a long retired or a long period of not earning that is ahead of you. So we recommend people think about, in your starting stages, think about saving around 30% of what you have, and then live your lifestyle according to that, because it tends to suffice.
So that's interesting. You're saying first invest and set aside, and then spend, rather than invest at the end of the month after your expenses, which doesn't happen really.
It tends to be a very, very difficult piece because, like I said, expenses find a way to creep up into what you have.
So Rinju, you have now more than 20 years of experience, I'm sure, investing for your own retirement and helping thousands of others achieve retirement readiness. Are there some interesting anecdotes you could share with us?
So let me take a case that is quite personal to me. So I was working with a family friend, and we were working on how much she needs for her retirement. And what we realized is we did all the planning, but the day she retired and she got a corpus in her hand, a lot of claimants started appearing for that corpus, claimants that we did not expect, right? So you should be very clear that at that stage, when someone in family comes, so this particular case, this lady had a child who suddenly said that she wanted to go abroad and study, which meant she expected her mother to take care of the tuition piece. And that took away a large part of what she was planning in terms of her retirement. So the number of claimants who come up once you have retired tends to be higher than what you initially planned for. That is something that we have to be careful about or cognizant about while planning.
So it's just like when you're at the end of something, you realize you're at the beginning of something new.
there's a little more that needed to be done. Yeah, so that is something that I would recommend people be aware of. Plan for it. And also, when you look at medical expenses, for example, we talk about recurring expenses, but we tend to forget these one-times that could potentially come up, right? The cost. I mean, personally, I know the cost, how much it costs for a heart surgery or any treatment that is not necessarily always planned for. They tend to be slightly harder on the pocket. So have a little more buffer in your retirement corpus than what the mathematical number comes out to.
So Rinju, while investing for your retirement, a lot of people will tend to have a home loan, and there are times you get a windfall, either in terms of your cash flow or returns. So what makes sense? Does it make sense to prepay your home loan or continue with the EMI and just keep investing for your retirement? What do you think works?
See, when this is a very personal choice that people have to make. The reality is, maybe mathematically continuing a home loan may make more sense. See, a home loan is a product that is actually subsidized by the government. So you take a home loan, let's assume that the husband and wife both are working, you get a tax rebate on the interest that you pay, on part of the principal that you pay. The rate of interest typically tends to be lower than what your investments would give you in all of these things. So mathematically, or if you were to think rationally alone, maybe continuing a home loan makes more sense. But not every decision has to be made rationally, right? Some decisions actually to be made with an emotional front also. So personally in my life, for example, when we bought our house, we had a home loan going. And not like we had windfalls, but whenever there was an investable surplus, we actually decided to repay the home loan before we contributed towards the retirement corpus. Because what I realized is, in my context and very personal to me, we were better off mentally without having a liability on our shoulder. I mean, my wife was very keen that we go debt free, and a happy wife is better than a few extra percentage points, right? So in my case, we decided to repay the home loan, but that's a very personal decision. I'd recommend you sit with your advisor and figure out what works for you.
So you're saying that over here, the personal finance is very important.
Very true, very true. It's very personal.
So sometimes when we think about retirement, we tend to think that this is sacred, and we can look at guaranteed instruments like, say, an employee provident fund, a PPF, a recurring deposit. Should it only be about guaranteed instruments, or is there a role for higher growth but risky and volatile instruments like, let's say, equity mutual funds? Do they have an important role to play? And how do you really plan that allocation over your retirement planning?
Yeah, so the products that you're talking about, and a lot of these guaranteed products tend to have a rate of return that is typically a percentage point over and above inflation, right? When it comes to retirement, you're trying to build a sizable corpus that will last you for a long time. So that's where the role of risk assets comes into play, right? So if you have a long enough time horizon, you should be allocating more to risk assets. So I'm not saying that there is no role of these non-risk assets. Of course there is, or these guaranteed products. But in reality, to achieve a sizable corpus, you have to include risk into your portfolio. That being said, if done intelligently, you should be able to reduce the amount of risk that your portfolio has. And in reality, be a little wary about what people call as guaranteed products, right? There's not really too many products that are really, really guaranteed, right? So the government of India can probably give you some product that is guaranteed, or they can guarantee you a rate of return, but inflation could kill you there. If the inflation rate is higher than the guaranteed rate of return, you're actually technically losing money on your investment. So be cautious about what sort of products you get into, and be aware that if you're building for a retirement corpus and if you have a long enough runway, you need risk assets into your portfolio more than what you need in terms of these non-risk assets.
So this word guarantee is a very loaded one, and you have to be careful with it.
That's one thing I'd recommend you do.
So, given that planning for your retirement is sometimes often a multi-decade endeavor, how do you choose the right partner to help you through this long journey full of uncertainties? I mean, a lot of us just went through COVID in 2020, completely unexpected. So how do you choose the right partner to help you invest through your retirement planning?
So I've said this in the past also. When financial goals are non-negotiable or tend to be really important, use the help of an advisor. And while choosing your advisor, there are a couple of things that you have to go with, right? So make sure that the advisor, his incentive is based on your outcomes. Don't go with somebody who gets incentivized for a sale of a product, right? These are long-term things. Choose an advisor who has experience, who actually has seen multiple market cycles, because you don't want to be stuck with products that are repetitions of mistakes of the past. And this happens a lot in financial markets, right? You see a lot of products that have caused trouble in the past getting repositioned, rebranded, but conceptually the same. So use people with experience, people who understand markets. Then we recommend that you go with an institutional practice rather than an individual. See, think about it like this. Your retirement is going to span a really long time. And the ability to have that partner throughout that journey is important. So if you go with an institution, you're sort of de-risking yourself from that individual being present or not. Like if you have an advisor today and he chooses to stop his advisory, or God forbid something happens to his practice, you don't want to be left in the lurch where you have you're seeing a gap between what was expected and what needs to be done then. So we recommend using an institution because there is a certain institutional memory that gets built out. There are practices, there are policies. The third thing is use people who use rational thinking, evidence-based approach, who are data-driven in their approach to investing, rather than, like that cowboy approach to investing. So we believe that using data, keeping the principles of margin of safety, all of these things will play off really well over the long run. So find an advisor that works for you and make sure that he's using all these principles.
Thank you, Rinju. This has been a really enlightening conversation. A lot of practical insights. I'm sure our viewers are going to get some great points on helping them get retirement ready. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.